Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to take a trip back in time. We're going to look at how our whole understanding of what's safe for our dogs has been completely flipped on its head over the years, not because of trends, but because of some really incredible scientific detective work.
You know, for so many of us, for generations, sharing food with our dogs was just a simple act of love. Giving them a few leftovers from dinner, a tasty bone from the roast, that was just a normal, loving part of having a dog in the family. It's what everybody did, and it absolutely came from the right place.
So, what changed? I mean, it wasn't that we suddenly stopped loving our dogs. Of course not. It's that science finally started giving us answers. Answers to these tragic mysteries that, for years and years, just had no explanation. All right, let's dive into this story.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with that old tradition of sharing food. Then, we're going to investigate the very real, physical dangers of bones. After that, we'll uncover a poison that was hiding in plain sight for 40 years. Then, we'll see how modern data solved a deadly puzzle. And finally, we'll look at a threat that's very, very new. Let's get started.
Okay, first up, something that just feels like the most natural dog treat in the entire world, right? A bone. For the longest time, the advice on this was pretty simple, but the science behind why that advice changed, well, it all comes down to physics.
And you know what? That whole iron stomach idea wasn't entirely wrong. Dogs really do have these incredibly acidic stomachs, which are perfectly evolved to break down the raw bones of prey animals. For thousands of years, this was just a normal part of being a dog. But the key word there, the one that changes everything, is raw.
And this slide right here shows you exactly why cooking a bone changes the entire game. See, a raw bone is filled with this flexible protein called collagen. It makes it tough, but it can bend and crush. When you cook it, though, that collagen basically melts away. And what's left is a brittle, almost glass-like mineral structure. So instead of crushing, it shatters into these sharp, needle-like splinters that can cause just devastating internal injuries.
And listen, this isn't some newfangled idea that just popped up on the internet. This warning, it comes from a dog care book published way back in 1951. That's over 70 years ago, long before a lot of the modern pet industry even existed. Vets and experts were already seeing this dangerous splintering effect from cooked chicken or rabbit bones. This knowledge is built on decades of real-world experience.
All right, let's move on to our next case file. And boy, is it a big one. Chocolate. The story here is just fascinating, because the science proving it was dangerous for dogs existed for decades before most of us ever heard about it. Now, if you grew up thinking chocolate was a perfectly fine treat for dogs, you were not alone. I mean, just look at old postcards, old advertisements. They frequently showed dogs happily munching on chocolate. It was seen as completely normal, a sweet little way to spoil your best friend. But here is the absolute shocker. As early as 1942, a scientist proved that cocoa was toxic to dogs. But that vital piece of information, it stayed locked away in veterinary journals, just circulating among academics. For 40 years, an entire generation, most people had no idea. It wasn't until a famous Dear Abby advice column in 1983 that the warning finally broke out into the mainstream and reached millions of homes.
So what's the actual culprit? It's a chemical called theobromine. Now, we humans, we process it pretty quickly, but in dogs, it has an incredibly long half-life. We're talking 17.5 hours. What that means is it just keeps building up and up and up in their system until it reaches toxic levels that can cause heart failure, often hours and hours after they've eaten the chocolate.
And this chart, this explains so much of the old confusion. See, the danger depends entirely on the type of chocolate. A dog might eat some milk chocolate and just get a tummy ache. But even a tiny amount of baking chocolate, with its super concentrated dose of theobromine, could be absolutely fatal. This probably explains countless tragedies from the past, especially around holidays, that were likely just misdiagnosed as sudden heart failure or natural causes.
Now let's jump forward into the modern era of discovery. Our next mystery is about a food we think of as incredibly healthy that turned out to be a silent killer for some dogs. And this puzzle wasn't solved by one person in a lab coat, it was solved by the power of big data. For many, many years, when a perfectly healthy dog's kidneys would suddenly fail for no apparent reason, vets had to use a specific word, idiopathic. It's just a medical term that means we have no idea what caused this. It was a heartbreaking, frustrating mystery, and the clue was something so common nobody even thought to look for it.
So the first breakthrough came in 1999.
a huge poison control database started noticing a faint pattern, a little statistical blip. A small number of dogs with kidney failure had all recently eaten grapes or raisins. An alert went out to vets in 2001, but for 20 years, nobody knew why they were toxic. Then, in 2021, the case was cracked by the most bizarre clue you can imagine: homemade Play-Doh. The link was an ingredient called cream of tartar, which, it turns out, is loaded with the very same toxin found in grapes, tartaric acid.
And this discovery finally solved the biggest puzzle of all, the randomness of it. The amount of tartaric acid can be wildly different from grape to grape, vine to vine. This is exactly why, for decades, so many people could say, "My dog ate grapes his whole life and was totally fine." And they were telling the truth. They just got lucky. Their dogs happened to eat grapes with low levels of the acid. But since there's no way to know which grape is safe and which is deadly, vets now have to treat every single time a dog eats them as a potential emergency.
This brings us right up to today, with a danger that honestly just didn't exist in most of our pantries until pretty recently. It's a man-made threat that actually came from our own changing diet trends.
Okay, just take a look at this number, 0.1 grams per kilogram of body weight. That is the incredibly tiny toxic dose of a sweetener called xylitol that can trigger a severe reaction in a dog.
So what does that number actually mean in the real world? Well, get this. For a small 10-pound dog, a toxic dose can be found in less than a single piece of some brands of sugar-free gum. It is just astonishingly potent, and it's hiding everywhere now, in some peanut butters, mints, even baked goods.
And the way it attacks the dog's body is just uniquely devastating. First, within about 30 minutes, it tricks the pancreas into releasing this massive insulin storm. This causes their blood sugar to crash to catastrophically low levels. But that's not all. In a second wave, higher doses can cause complete, irreversible liver failure, sometimes days later. It's a brutal 1-2 punch that makes it one of the most lethal household toxins we've talked about.
So after looking at everything from bones and chocolate to grapes and xylitol, what's the big takeaway here? What have we really learned? This journey through history really shows us just how far veterinary medicine has come.
This table, right here, really puts our whole journey into perspective. For every single one of these dangers, there was a time when a tragic loss would have been labeled something vague, like a blockage or idiopathic failure. Step by step, science gave us the real names for these invisible killers. And this isn't about blaming the past or feeling bad about what we didn't know. It's about celebrating how we've been able to replace mystery with medicine, which empowers all of us to protect our pets in ways that past generations simply couldn't.
So I think the most important takeaway from all of this is that our knowledge is always growing. This history shows that staying curious and informed is the best tool we have, and it leaves us with a pretty powerful question, doesn't it? What's the next common, safe food out there that's hiding a secret we just haven't discovered yet? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.